The gavel came down 3 times. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy enough to make the air inside the federal courtroom feel like it had collapsed inward. Judge Everly Prescott didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on the woman in the powder blue suit sitting at the defendant's table. The woman everyone in this county had learned to fear, HOA Karen. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said calmly, "This court finds Silvervale Summit Estates and its governing body, commonly referred to as HOA Karen, liable for 127 counts of fraud, trespass, and unlawful water diversion spanning 15 years. 400 people froze at once. I watched HOA Karen's hands tighten around the edge of the table. Perfect manicure, white knuckles. The pearls around her neck trembled as if they already knew what was coming. The entire subdivision, Judge Prescott continued, was constructed on land, illegally taken from the Caldwell family through forged surveys and fraudulent conveyances. All property titles derived from the 1989 deed are hereby declared void." A sound moved through the courtroom like a shockwave. Someone gasped. Someone cried. Someone laughed once, short, sharp, disbelieving. Oh, Karen swayed. For half a second I thought she might actually faint. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, turning to me, "you are recognized as the rightful owner of the underlying land. As a result, all 127 existing deeds are invalid. 3 weeks earlier, this same woman had stood on my porch. She had waved a stack of bright orange violation notices, inches from my face like weapons. 'You have 72 hours, she'd said, her voice dripping with entitlement, to pay $100,000 in fines or vacate. This lake belongs to the HOA. You are trespassing on premium community property.' I hadn't argued. I hadn't yelled. I smiled. The kind of smile my old colleagues used to call the coffin. Smile, because whenever I wore it, someone's empire was about to be buried. HOA Karen didn't know who she was threatening. She didn't know I'd spent 16 years dismantling far larger operations than hers. She didn't know that by dragging my daughter into this, by using intimidation. Instead of law, she'd turned a quiet inheritance into a full-scale war. And to understand how 127 wealthy families ended up paying me rent, we have to go back 3 weeks, back to the rusted gates of a forgotten ranch, back to the moment I realized my grandfather hadn't left me land. He'd left me a weapon, because the first thing HOA Karen did when she saw that cabin wasn't called a lawyer. She sent golf carts onto land she never owned. The dirt road shouldn't have existed. My pickup rattled over ruts carved by decades of neglect, winding through lodgepole pines so old they blocked satellite signals entirely. No GPS, no service, just forest, dust, and memory. Beside me, my daughter Marlo sat quietly, pretending to focus on her tablet. She hadn't said much since we crossed the county line. "Dad," she said suddenly, peering out the windshield. "The road just stops." She was right. Ahead of us, half swallowed by weeds, stood a wooden sign barely holding itself upright. Caldwell Ranch, private property, no trespassing. The letters were faded but still defiant. 18 months since my wife died. 18 months of grief, relocations, and convincing a 16-year-old that life wasn't permanently broken. For the first time since the funeral, my chest loosened. The cabin appeared around the bend like something out of a painting. 2 stories of hand-hewn, cedar logs overlooking a lake, so still it mirrored the snow-capped mountains perfectly. The water shifted from emerald to turquoise as the sun moved. "Mom would have loved this," Marlo whispered. The words hit harder than I expected. While she explored inside, I opened the lockbox my grandfather's lawyer had sent. Inside were 3 things that explained everything. First, a 1934 survey map, 847 acres. The lake, every inch of shoreline. Second, a federal water rights certificate from 1952, stamped by the Army Corps of Engineers. Silvervale Lake, federally protected, navigable. Third, a handwritten letter. "When you read this, someone will have tried to steal what belongs to our family. Use what your father taught you. I've been waiting 60 years for someone who knows how to fight back." I read it 3 times. My father had spent my childhood teaching me water law, property disputes, and federal regulations. I thought it was obsession. It was preparation. The hum of electric motors snapped me out of it. Golf carts. 3 of them. They rolled in from the north, through land that, according to the map in my hands, had no legal access. The woman who stepped out moved like she owned the world. Powder blue suit. Pearl necklace. Platinum hair pulled so tight it looked painful. "Mr. Caldwell," she said sweetly, I'm the president of the HOA, HOA Karen, and we need to discuss your situation. Because the next words out of her mouth weren't a greeting. They were a threat disguised as a rule. My situation? I repeated calmly. 16 years of depositions had taught me one rule. Let arrogant people talk. HOA Karen gestured toward the lake like she was unveiling a luxury feature. This waterfront is a community amenity. Our residents pay premium fees for exclusive access. Your cabin sits on the HOA-controlled shoreline. I said nothing. She mistook silence for weakness. I have a list of violations, she continued, nodding to the man beside her, who shoved papers at my chest. Unauthorized structure, failure to register with community management, blocking an established recreational easement. Easement? I asked, finally looking at her. Interesting. Could you provide the county registration number? The smallest flicker crossed her face. Gone in a blink, but I saw it. That documentation is handled by our legal team. Then I'll wait for... I said evenly. Until then, you're standing on private property. I'll need you to leave. She stepped closer. Her perfume was sharp, deliberate. You don't understand how things work here, HOA Karen whispered. This community is built by powerful families, judges, developers, politicians. You're just one man in a decaying cabin. I met her eyes. That's exactly why I'm here. She stared at me longer than she meant to, measuring, recalculating, then turned sharply and marched back to her cart. You'll hear from our attorneys, she snapped, and you'll regret this. 72 hours later, the violations arrived. 9 bright orange notices plastered across my door. False charges, fake fines, fabricated authority. Total, $42,000. As I photographed every notice, Marlo studied the map pinned to the wall. Dad, she said quietly, those golf carts? They came from the North Trail. I looked up. That's the only flat access to the lake, she continued. If they lose it, they add 45 minutes every trip. 16 years old, grieving, and already seeing the leverage point. That evening I drove the perimeter. Trails, docks, pump stations, infrastructure built on land that wasn't theirs. HOA Karen hadn't just overstepped. She'd left fingerprints everywhere. And the next morning, when I walked into the county recorder's office, I learned she wasn't just stealing land. She was erasing people. The county recorder's office smelled like dust, toner, and quiet warnings. I arrived 15 minutes early, which gave me time to notice the black sedan parked across the street. Engine running, windows tinted, watching. Inside, the clerk glanced at the address. I wrote on the request form and slowly lowered her voice. Silvervale Lake? She asked. You're not the first. That was all she said, but it was enough. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a back room surrounded by 40 years of property records. Maps stacked like fallen dominoes. Deeds yellowed at the edges. Survey after survey telling 2 very different stories. The original survey, 1952, placed the subdivision boundary 300 meters from the shoreline. The HOA Karen version, filed in 1989, started at the water itself. Someone had redrawn the land, and someone had forged my grandfather's name to do it. I compared the signature on the survey with the one from the letter in my lockbox. Different pressure, different slant, different rhythm. Not even close. 300 meters of shoreline, wrapped around the lake equaled 103 stolen acres. At current prices, $12 million. And that was just the land. I dug deeper. Silvervale Utilities, the company charging residents for lake water, was owned by a Delaware shell company. That shell company traced back to a development firm owned by HOA Karen's husband. For 23 years, 127 families had paid $500 a month for water that never belonged to the HOA. $17 million. I photographed everything, twice, paid for certified copies in cash, no trail. When I walked back outside, the black sedan followed me all the way to the ranch. That night, the first legal letter arrived. Demand $67,000. Deadline 72 hours. Threat, foreclosure. They're scared, Marlo said, reading over my shoulder. They're rushing. She was right. People who know they're innocent take their time. People who know they're guilty try to bury you fast. And when rushing didn't scare me, HOA Karen escalated. She stopped targeting me and went after my daughter. Day 7 started with a scream. Marlo stood barefoot on the porch, pointing toward the lake. The dock was gone. Not removed, destroyed. The structure my grandfather had built by hand, had been sawed clean through at the waterline. Broken planks floated like debris from a shipwreck. Bolted to the remaining post was a laminated sign. Unauthorized structure removed per HOA regulation. HOA Karen had done it in daylight. I called 911, then I called the number. Deputy Finch had quietly slipped. Me days earlier. He arrived within an hour. Took photos. Said very little. Before leaving, he leaned closer. "You didn't hear this from me," he whispered. "But every complaint against that woman disappears. Judges, inspectors, records, all gone." Then the black SUV arrived. 2 men stepped out, cheap suits, fake authority. "Child Protective Services," one announced. "We received a report concerning a minor on this property." My hands clenched. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was war. I let them inside, documented everything, smiled while they searched a spotless cabin with a well-fed, well-adjusted teenager and nothing to report. After they left, Marlo sat across from me, calm and furious. "This is personal now," she said. "It already was," I replied. She turned her laptop toward me. "The notary who certified the 1989 survey? His license was revoked 2 years before he supposedly witnessed that signature." I stared at her. "Mom always said details matter," she added. That night I made 3 calls. A federal investigator, an independent surveyor with no Montana ties, and a forensic accountant who hated bullies more than paperwork. HOA Karen thought she was applying pressure. She was actually triggering alarms, because the next knock on my door didn't come from the county. It came from the man they'd already destroyed for telling the truth. He showed up just after sunrise. 72 years old, weathered hands, eyes that carried 13 years of buried rage. "I surveyed this land in 2009, he said, "and I found the discrepancy. Augustus Brennan, the surveyor who noticed the boundary theft and lost everything for it. He told me how his license was revoked, how complaints vanished, how he was labeled fraudulent overnight. Then he handed me a USB drive. Copies of everything, he said. Measurements, reports, originals. I kept them because I knew someone would need them. My war room came alive. Survey data confirmed the theft. Financials proved the laundering. Federal water records showed illegal infrastructure, RICO territory. By day 14, the ranch was buzzing with quiet purpose. Deputy Finch stopped by nightly. The accountant mapped $40 million in exposure. Marlo built a document database prosecutors would dream about. Then the final letter arrived. $100,000 due in 48 hours. Foreclosure threatened. Eviction promised. HOA Karen was all in. So I called her lawyer. I'll pay, I said. But I want a public meeting. Full HOA. Every resident. He paused. Agreed 1. Community center. Tomorrow night. I hung up and turned to Marlo. You don't actually have a check, do you? She asked. I smiled. The coffin smile. No, I said. I have something better. Because tomorrow night, HOA Karen wouldn't be collecting money. She'd be meeting the evidence that would destroy her. The Silver Veil, Summit Community Center, was never meant to hold 400 people. By 7:45 p.m., it was overflowing, residents packed shoulder to shoulder, whispers buzzing like electricity. Everyone had heard the same rumor. The stubborn cabin owner was finally surrendering. HOA Karen sat at the head table on a raised platform, perfectly composed in another light blue suit. Pearl's immaculate makeup, the smile of someone who believed the ending was already written. Her husband sat beside her. Their lawyer stood confidently nearby. I arrived at 7:55. Marlo walked next to me, carrying my father's old leather briefcase. Conversations died as we moved down the center aisle. A Karen leaned into the microphone. Mr. Caldwell, she said sweetly. How gracious of you to finally comply. Do you have the payment? I brought something better, I replied. Her smile faltered just a fraction. I opened the briefcase. Not checks, not cash. 500 identical packets slid into my hands. Residents passed them down the rows, confusion spreading as papers changed hands. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying without amplification, what you're holding is the reason you've been overpaying. And underinformed. Marlo connected her laptop to the projector. 2 maps filled the screen. One dated 1952. One dated 1989. Notice the shoreline, I said calmly. The original boundary starts 300 meters back. The later one doesn't. Murmurs exploded. Someone stood up. That's our backyard. Someone redrew the land, I continued, and forged my grandfather's signature to do it. HOA Karen jumped to her feet. This is outrageous. And that signature, I added, not raising my voice, was notarized by a man whose license had already been revoked for fraud. Silence. I let it sit, because this wasn't even the worst thing she'd done. And the next slide would prove it. Marlowe advanced the presentation. Bank statements. Corporate filings. Shell company charts. For 23 years, I said. Each household here paid $500 a month for water. A man in the front row whispered, "That's over $100,000. Per family," I confirmed. And that money didn't go to maintenance. The next slide appeared. Silvervale Utilities, Delaware Shell, development firm, HOA Karen's husband. A sound like air being punched from lungs moved through the room. "He sold you water," I said, "from a lake he never owned." HOA Karen's husband gripped the table, his face draining of color. "This is defamation," HOA Karen screamed. "Security, remove him!" No one moved. These were her neighbors, her voters, her victims. "Our lawyer verified everything," she snapped. I turned to the attorney. "You're listed as the registered agent for the Shell company receiving diverted funds." Every eye swung toward him. He didn't deny it. "My name is Stanton Caldwell," I continued. "For 16 years, I investigated federal water theft. 47 cases. 47 convictions. I have never lost." The room went deathly quiet. "You threatened my home. You sent CPS after my daughter. You destroyed my family's property." I took one step closer. "And now you're done." HOA Karen laughed, sharp, desperate. "You think papers win wars? We own this county." The doors slammed open. FBI windbreakers. Federal badges. Agent Comstock stepped forward. "Cordelia Ashworth," she said coldly. "You're under arrest." Handcuffs clicked. HOA Karen screamed. But the real shock wasn't the arrest. It was what the judge would do to 127 homes. 6 months later, the federal courtroom was silent again. Judge Prescott reviewed the final documents without drama. "This subdivision," she ruled, "was constructed through systematic fraud. All titles derived from the 1989 survey are void." Panic rippled through the gallery. Then her hand rose. "However," she continued, "the residents are innocent parties." Relief washed over the room. "They may remain under a corrected lease structure. Rent will be 1/10 of previous HOA fees." Gasps turned into disbelief. "The lake would be conserved, the money refunded. The stolen land returned. HOA Karen received 18 years. Her husband received 22. Their lawyer was disbarred. A machine built on fear collapsed. A year later, I stood on a rebuilt dock. Cedar, solid, honest. Marlowe joined me, holding a letter. "Nevada," she said. "Same pattern. Bigger scale." I smiled. "Then we're not done." Because HOA Karen was only one chapter, and the next state was already calling HOA. Karen didn't look powerful in prison orange. That was the first thing I noticed when the U.S. Marshal led her into the courtroom for sentencing. No pearls, no tailored suit, no carefully rehearsed authority. Just a woman who had finally run out of leverage. The prosecutor didn't rush. She laid everything out slowly. Bank transfers, shell companies, forged surveys, witness intimidation, and federal water theft. Each charge stacked on top of the last like bricks sealing a wall. When the judge spoke, her voice carried no anger, only certainty. "Cordelia Ashworth," she said, "you used wealth and influence to steal land, silence witnesses, and weaponize institutions against innocent families. This court finds no mitigating factors." HOA Karen's lawyer tried one last time, claimed community leadership, claimed misunderstanding, claimed her actions were procedural errors. The judge didn't even look up. 18 years in federal prison, she said. Asset forfeiture totaling $12 million. Oh, Karen made a sound then. Not a scream. Not a cry. A sharp breath like someone realizing the floor is gone. Her husband was sentenced next. 22 years, no parole. Their lawyer? Disbarred. 12 years. By the time the gavel fell, an entire ecosystem of corruption had collapsed. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. People cheered. Others just stood quietly, absorbing the fact that the woman who controlled their lives for decades was gone. Marlowe squeezed my hand. "It's really over," she said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "This part is. Because when a system like HOA Karen's collapses, it doesn't just disappear. It exposes others hiding nearby. Once HOA Karen fell, the silence broke. People started calling. Former residents, contractors, county employees, who'd been told to forget files. Inspectors whose reports had vanished. Patterns emerged. Always the same structure, always the same intimidation, always the same result. Deputy Finch, now Sheriff Finch, reopened cases. Buried for years, fraud, coerced sales, title manipulation. 7 county officials resigned within months. 3 were indicted. The judge who had dismissed every complaint against HOA Karen, removed from the bench, charged with obstruction. The machine Augustus Brennan warned. Me about wasn't broken, it was being dismantled bolt by bolt. The lake changed too. Illegal pumps removed. Unauthorized docks dismantled. Water clarity improved within weeks. Families who once whispered behind closed doors are now gathered openly by the shore. The gates came down. Silvervale Lake became public again. One afternoon, Augustus stood beside me on the dock, watching kids throw rocks into water that finally belonged to no one and everyone. I waited 13 years, he said quietly. Thought it was too late. It wasn't, I replied. They just hadn't picked the wrong person yet. Marlo returned from school with college letters. Environmental law. She reads cases for fun now. At night she found something. Dad, she said, sliding her laptop toward me. HOA Karen's shell companies didn't stop at Montana. Nevada, Arizona, Idaho. Same developers, same utilities, same fake surveys. Different victims. And the next letter didn't come from a homeowner. It came from a state attorney general. The envelope was thick, official, out of Nevada. Inside was a formal request. We believe your evidence may connect to multiple disputed land. Titles affecting an entire municipality. An entire town. I laughed once, quiet, disbelieving. Marlo didn't smile. When do we leave? She asked. I looked out at the lake. Calm. Restored. Honest again. HOA Karen had power once. Real power. Money judges fear. She used it to take. We had something else. Truth. Documentation. And the patience to wait until the right moment. Soon, I said. Marlo nodded, already opening a new folder on her laptop. Outside, the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the water gold. Somewhere in Nevada, another HOA Karen thought she was untouchable. She wasn't, because Montana was just the warning shot, and the next state had no idea what was coming. The Nevada Attorney General didn't waste time. 2 days after the letter arrived, my phone rang at 6:12 a.m. We believe at least 9 HOAs in Clark County were built using fraudulent title transfers, she said. Same patterns, same shell companies, same survey discrepancies. I closed my eyes. HOA Karen hadn't been an anomaly. She'd been a template. Nevada was different, though. Bigger money, faster deals. Entire neighborhoods flipped before anyone noticed the ground shifting beneath them. We drove south a week later. The first site looked perfect. Manicured lawns, palm trees, decorative stone walls. But the documents told a different story. Public land quietly privatized. Water rights rerouted. Residents charged community access fees for resources that were never owned, and always at the center. An HOA Karen, different names, same behavior. The local Karen didn't threaten fines first. She threatened silence. You don't want trouble here, she told me during our first meeting. People who ask questions don't last long. Marlo typed as she listened. That night she uncovered something new. Dad, she said slowly, these HOAs are linked through a national consulting firm. One firm, dozens of Karens, multiple states. This wasn't greed. It was organized. And when we followed the consulting firm, we realized HOA Karen wasn't the boss. She was the front. The firm called itself Civic Harmony Solutions. Neutral name, harmless branding, predatory business model. They offered HOAs optimization services. Translation, how to extract maximum money, suppress dissent, and weaponize bylaws legally enough to delay lawsuits for years. Training manuals, scripts, escalation trees. One chapter was titled, Managing Non-Compliant Homeowners. Another, Leveraging Government Agencies for Compliance. CPS, Code Enforcement, Zoning Boards, all listed as pressure options. Marlo stared at the screen. They taught them how to do this. Federal investigators moved fast once they saw it. Search warrants, seized servers, internal emails. One message froze the room. Montana HOA situation collapsed. Containment failed. Recommend accelerating Nevada timeline before exposure spreads. HOA Karen had tried to bury me. Instead, she'd triggered a federal domino effect. By the time Civic Harmony's executives were arrested, the news cycle exploded. National coverage, congressional hearings, HOAs across the country panicked. Phones rang nonstop. People were finally asking questions. But the biggest twist came from someone who was supposed to be untouchable. The final email came from a locked executive folder. Sender, U.S. Land Advisory Council, a federal-adjacent nonprofit. Lobbyists, donors, politicians. Civic Harmony hadn't been freelancing. They were protected. The council didn't create the fraud, but they normalized it. They buried complaints, redirected oversight, labeled victims anti-community agitators. One name appeared again and again. A former senator, now a consultant. Once that name went public, the system panicked. Resignations followed within hours. Investigations opened across 4 states. HOA Karen started turning on each other. Plea deals, testimony, data dumps. A structure built to never be questioned was suddenly begging to be heard. Marlo leaned back in her chair. They never thought anyone would connect it. I nodded. They counted on people feeling small. And then the final court ruling rewrote HOA law forever. The ruling came down quietly. No cameras, no drama. But it changed everything. Federal precedent. HOAs could no longer claim authority over land they didn't explicitly own. Water rights required independent verification. Violation enforcement required third-party review. Weaponized HOAs were finished. Thousands of cases reopened. Millions refunded. Civic Harmony dissolved overnight. The former senator resigned for health reasons. Everyone knew the truth. Across the country, people stood a little straighter. They weren't powerless anymore. But the real ending wasn't legal. It was personal. We returned to Silvervale Lake a year later. The water was clean. The shoreline is natural again. No gates, no guards, no fear. Marlo skipped a stone across the surface. Funny, she said. All this started because one woman thought rules only applied to other people. She wasn't special, I replied. She just thought no one would push back. Marlo smiled. I won't forget that. She'd been accepted into law school early. Environmental and property law. She wanted to protect places like this. People like us. As the sun set, my phone buzzed again. Another state. Another HOA. Same pattern. I silenced it. Not tonight. Tonight, the lake belonged to everyone. Because HOA Karen wasn't the end of the story. She was the warning.